this episode, Andy is joined by author of The Eighth Wonder of the World, The True Story of Andre the Giant, Bertrand Hebert. Welcome to the Road Home from Wrestling interview.
Here in my car, I feel safest of all. I can lock all my doors, and it's the only way I live in cars.
All right, well, welcome back to the Road Home from Wrestling interview. You guys know my name's Andy. I'm coming to you live to tape from the Road Home from Wrestling World Headquarters of the world. And today we got another author in. It's always fun to have an author. Today, one of the authors of The Eighth Wonder of the World, The True Story of Andre the Giant. Oh, I'm hyping myself up to say this name right. I'm sorry. It's Bertrand Hebert, right?
Perfect.
All right, awesome. Where are you at right now?
I'm suburb of Montreal in the small town of Beauharnois where I was born. So, working from home.
Pro wrestling is a big part of Canada. It really is. It's a very American thing, and, we kind of look at it as this American thing, but it's a big part of the kind of, childhood of a lot of people growing up in Canada. Isn't that right?
Regional wrestling was very strong in Canada, in Ontario, in Alberta, and in Quebec, and in the Maritimes. So there was strong regional territories back in the days, and they all produced a local star that became huge star locally. And so from there, it always felt a little bit like your childhood, or when you see wrestling, and there's a lot of fans, and from generation to generation, the torch get passed on.
Now, you are involved in passing the torch a little bit in a couple different ways. So this isn't the first book you've written about professional wrestling, is that correct?
Exactly. I mean, me and Pat Laprade have worked before on the Mad Dogs, Midgets, and Screwjobs book about the history of the Montreal wrestling territory. We have also put together, like the first one, in both English and French, the Mad Dog Vachon biography. And I've also had the pleasure of working with Pat Patterson on his biography, Accepted. And so now it's the Andre the Giant project, and as he's known in French, there will be also a French biography that me and Pat put together of this new project that we are so proud of finally presenting to the world in a time where we all need a little bit of a positive.
Yes. Now, you and your family, you guys are safe and everything. Is that correct?
Yes. We're stuck at home, but safe.
Well, that's a great time to do two things. One, write a book. The other thing is read a book. So, as an author, this has to be kind of a little bit of a blessing, I guess, right?
Yeah, I agree on that at 100%. Andre would not have loved being stuck at home and not being able to go out and go to the bar and have fun with his friends. But, that's for people to discover reading the book.
Now, before we get into this, let me do a little bit of housekeeping here. So this book is published by ECW Press, and that's not Extreme Championship Wrestling. It's something Canadian WordPress or something like that. And you can get this book now. It's available on ecwpress.com, also on Amazon for only $20, by the way. And I have the book right in front of me, and it is over 400 pages with many color photographs and
There's over 100
many
pictures in the book.
It's wow. The pictures are awesome. And, obviously as we discussed before we started recording, I'm just a dumb Yankee Doodle down here in America. So, I appreciate pictures when I see them in a book. You can also get this one on Audible. And you can get it for free if you use our code audibletrial.com/theroadhomefw. Now, who is reading the book on Audible?
We don't know. I think it's going to be one of their regular reader. It's not anyone from the wrestling business, and it should be available by the end of the month.
Will Pat Patterson be doing a vocal track for his book at any point?
I have not been approached about this. I would be very surprised he would have the patience to go through that process.
Well, a lot of people make fun of what he sounds like, and so I think that would be an interesting thing as a rib on
Well,
him, basically.
I've been told by Mick Foley that when he read the book, he had the impression that Pat was speaking in his heads, and he said, so I think that's the biggest compliment, that the book is really written in a way that you would feel if you were talking with Pat.
That's outstanding. I love that. That's great. So folks can get this now. It just came out yesterday. Is that right?
Yeah. The official release date was yesterday, and the first few critic has been very humbling, actually, because you work so hard on the book, you reread, and cut and paste and change and add and make sure that you cut all the mistakes, and at some point you've read the same part many times, and we were actually doing the translation of our own book in French at the same time as we were finishing the English version. So we have the impression of having read the book already 30 times or something, or more. So at this point, you don't know what people are. You think you did good. You think you have a good book and a good story, but when people start telling you that it's one of the best book about wrestling, a best biography they've ever read, and they've learned so much about Andre, people in the business, well, it's very comfortable. It's very comforting for us
That's
to know that we did what we set ourselves as a goal, is to bring Andre to life, but not just the career, but who was that person who played Andre the Giant for all those years.
Well, one of the things that happens in pro wrestling, and the more legendary the figure, the more this tends to happen, and that is, who is Andre the Giant versus who is Andre, I'm going to butcher it, his real last name, which I don't want to.
Roussimoff.
There you go, Roussimoff. So, who are these two different people, and are they the same person? Because over time, that's what happens. Like, the character gels into the person, and when people see an image of Andre, they don't think, oh, that's Andre Roussimoff. They think that's Andre the Giant. They also don't think in a duality way. They just think that's who that is. Is that an interesting thing to write about? Because that's kind of what this book is about, right?
It is very interesting. And wrestlers from that particular eras, from the 70s and the 80s, are very often, they became bystander into their own life, because the real person takes a back seat to the character. And in the case of Andre, it's not like he could put a baseball cap and sunglasses and go to the restaurant and nobody would notice. As soon as he was out of his house or out of the hotel room, he was on. He had to be on. He had to be Andre the Giant, because that's what people saw on television. So, and that is very, very interesting, because there is, I, as a fan of Andre the Giant, I want to know who he was. I want to know what brought him there, and why did he make those decisions, and why was his relationship with his daughter strained, and why there was never any marriage or any special lady in his life, and things of that nature. You want to know that real person, and I think we got quite a few powerful glimpses into the person as we went along in the process of putting the book together.
Well, again, the name of the book, The Eighth Wonder of the World, we all know that part. But I know this is a cliche kind of thing to say, but it says it's the true story of Andre the Giant. So, kind of the goal of this book is to, remove the true man from the legend, so that, when you hear a story about him drinking 37 bottles of wine before noon on a Tuesday, that maybe that's not true, and that I'm assuming you guys focused on that stuff a little bit. That's what everybody wants to know. They want to know, did he really eat all this? Did he really do all this? But I think the most fascinating thing to me about Andre is that he was big, yes, but that's not why he was famous. It's not because he's big. He was famous because of his charisma. He's one of the most charismatic people ever. And that's why you still remember him. If you're 40 like me and you remember seeing him on TV as a kid and you'll never forget that, it's because of that charisma. What did you learn about his personality and how that kind of helped people gravitate towards him?
I mean, he was a very joyful person, at least in the early days. He liked to enjoy life and take care of his friends and, introduce his friends to the good things in life and, truly enjoy everything. He did enjoy food. He did enjoy drinking. But, and what the trick was, can we get a first-hand account? Because that's one of the issue. I mean, a lot of people say they were there or tell a story of Andre drinking 125 beer or something, but they were not actually there. So as we go along, and in that regard, we were very lucky. I mean, I spoke to Mean Gene Okerlund before he passed on, and he was very close to Andre, especially in the AWA days and all that. So his take on it was very simple and very real. I mean, one story became two story, and two story became five, and so forth, because everybody wanted to tell that story, and everybody they started telling the story of somebody who told them about the story, and then they were in the story, and that type of thing built up over the years. So everybody was there drinking 120 beer with Andre, which makes it look like he did that every night, which is not the case. He did do that on occasion, like he did do on occasion, called everything on the menu and eat everything. But he would do that once in a while because he could, and to make people laugh. But when he was at the ranch, he would eat fruit and yogurt. So we got that. You see, when he was out, he was on. There was a show to be, Lee Majors tells stories of him on the set of the $6 Million Man, where obviously he was putting on a show, eating like steaks, and I insist on the S, a full chicken and a dozen of eggs for breakfast and things of that nature, because he was putting on a show for the crew, obviously. He wanted to make sure that his persona of the giant would get over with the crew there and that they would talk about it. Which was a lot of what the wrestlers of that era would do. And Andre was at the top of that list because he was traveling everywhere, making sure everybody sees him and talk about it. So,
well, and another thing, too, is that other wrestlers or other wrestling personalities have an interest in making Andre look as, crazy as people think he is as far as his habits and things like that, because that makes them more money if they're on a card with him, right?
Yeah, obviously. Andre was a huge draw everywhere he went. He was the big equalizer in the time of the territory. In Montreal, I mean, the big role that Andre had in the 80s was that Dino Bravo, the Rougeau, or someone would have trouble with 2 heels and 3 heels. And, suddenly for the big show like Easter show or the big summer vacation show or Christmas show or those big shows, Andre would come in as the tag team partner. And then you say, those guys are in trouble now because, Dino Bravo and Gino Brito have Andre the Giant as a partner. So, they cannot get away with it now. So that was a big deal. And it was also, if you saw an interview of Andre on television, that was a big deal. You barely saw him wrestle on television. So going to the show and see Andre was a lot of what people did back in the day. And he would draw outside of the wrestling fans because people wanted to see the Giant. There was all of that in there. And you are completely right. And, Andre was very good in understanding the psychology of the business and how to work and how to draw people and how to draw sympathy. He was a 7 foot, let's say a 7 foot Andre Roussimoff and a 7'4" Andre the Giant. And he was able to draw sympathy on himself, as a baby face, which is quite impressive because the first reaction of most promoters today would be to take the big giant monster and make him a heel. Although, ultimately that's where he would, became the icon he was to become as they were building Hulk Hogan as the mega babyface. So it is the joys and tribulation of the wrestling business. And Andre was for the 2 decades one of the biggest star until Hulk Hogan came along in the WWF of the wrestling business.
It's interesting. We're jumping around a little bit here, but I just watched WrestleMania 6 recently, and in that he tags with Haku, and he has Bobby Heenan. They have Bobby Heenan in their corner. At the end of the match, he basically turns on Bobby Heenan, turns on him and smacks him, and he destroys Bobby Heenan and he destroys Haku, and he leaves the ring on that little tiny ring on a cart that they have, and that iconic shot of him leaving for the last time in WWF, and he gets to leave as a babyface after years of being off and on, and changing and everything, but making guys. And that's the thing, is that Andre immediately added credibility to anyone he was facing or anyone he was tagging with or just appearing with on screen,
Yeah.
And part of that is because of the wrestling psychology. Part of that is just because, man, I want to hang out with that guy. I think there's
I mean, I've seen very cynical people in the wrestling business, when we talked about our Andre project. I mean, people will say to you, well, I don't have wrestling people, right? Wrestling people will say, in my house, I don't have anything wrestling related, no pictures, no nothing, but I have a picture of myself and Andre.
Wow.
And I have my picture of me and Andre on my phone. They took that picture 40 years ago and they have it on their phone. So, he not only, was a big draw in with the crowd, but even in the dressing room, he was someone that everyone respected. And they knew that, Andre being on their card meant a lot business-wise and meant more money in their paycheck. And they all respected him very much to this day.
Do you think that Andre's character as a person, his charisma, his wish to please others, do you think that part of that comes because he was in so much pain all the time and he was looking for an escape from that?
Well, clearly, I mean, it is our point of view that, he learned for the first time in the Japanese store that he had acromegaly and that, his lifespan would be limited and that he needed to take advantage of life as much as possible. At least that seems to be the deal he decided to make. From there, obviously, that meant going out with his buddies, and that meant drinking and having fun and doing anything he could think of that was fun. Obviously, as we went along, and after '87, when he became a heel in the United States, he was not the same wrestler that he was before, and he also was not the same gentle giant that he was before outside. So slowly, his body's ailment mirrored his mood as well. The more miserable he was with his body, and the worse his mood got as we go along. But we try to make people understand in the book how incredibly, have you ever took a plane? Imagine 7 foot and 400 pounds and be stuck in a plane going to Japan for 12, 14 hours. And you don't fit in the restroom. What are you going to do? What do you have to do to prepare yourself? And do you imagine going back to the hotel room and you want to take a shower and you can't because you just don't fit into the shower? That type of thing. That was normal life. That was day to day for him. So obviously, I mean, that creates resentment as we go along, and also create, the famous moodiness of his later years.
Yeah, as you say, he was supposed to be moody in his later years. A lot of that because of the things that you said. but he also did some of his best, things in his later years. I don't know exactly how old he was, but he appeared in a couple movies, and one of them, most people know him from, The Princess Bride. And you guys have some kind of behind the scenes stuff in this book that no one's ever heard before. Is that right?
Yeah, we were able to discover through research and interviews and going a little bit deeper into this about his time on the set. And he loved that because he was having the same kind of a backstage fun that he had on wrestling. Because, when you do a TV show, you're there for about 3-4 days or something. When you shoot a movie, you have to count in months. So that's a different thing. He was also very close by to his native France, and he was able to go and see his family on a regular basis and get that brotherhood atmosphere backstage while waiting to shoot his scenes. And it's very fitting that he has that magnificent movie that has become such a cult hit. And even today, I was talking with someone who said, until I saw your book, I had no idea that he was even a wrestler. But I love The Princess Bride. I just thought he was a big actor. So, and she's 20 something. So that just gives you an idea. If you're not a wrestling fan, I mean, you may actually know Andre because of that movie. So there's probably to learn.
I was just going to say, there's probably somebody somewhere that was watching that movie, had no idea, and thought, that guy would be great in wrestling. I guarantee you that at some point somebody thought that.
It's not entirely impossible, I would say.
Well, that's one of the kind of unique things about this book. And the other thing, too, is that you guys talked to his family members. Is that right?
Yeah, my colleague went to France to speak with the brothers and his friends from the bar where he played cards the night before passing.
Wow.
His nephew lives here in Montreal. He actually moved here in the early 90s, and he lives in Montreal, and he has kind of become the Roussimoff family historian, if you will. So he had a lot of knowledge, and he knew about the family tree from Europe and all that. So they were very, very helpful in putting together the puzzle. And also to give us a perspective on who he was, because they had access to Andre Roussimoff. They barely knew anything about Andre the Giant because, he would not talk about it too much. And, one of the brother was always talking about his height. And he was quoting a line from a wrestling magazine he saw. It's not like Andre told him, they measure me and that's how tall I am. No. He was quoting something from a wrestling magazine that he read. So, they were a very secretive family, and we talk about the movie. The movie was shot a little bit before WrestleMania 3 and also before the back operation that he desperately needed at the time. And he got the operation after WrestleMania 3, and, nobody in the family knew about it. They all learned that he got the big back operation only after it was all done. So, he was a very secretive person. He didn't want to worry anyone. And, he was living that life, in a fishbowl where, anywhere he could go, he was the center of attraction. That's what people don't understand. Imagine you have a daughter who's, let's say she's 6 or 7, old enough to do things with her, like go to the movie or go to Walt Disney World or things of that nature. That's not possible. He cannot go anywhere with his daughter because that's going to turn into a circus as soon as he shows up, So that created issues beyond the fact that she lived with her mother far and away. Makes things very hard and difficult. And it's, in a sense, it was worse and back then because there was no possible communication like Skype or FaceTime or anything of that nature. And at the same time, also, that meant that if you couldn't find a phone, you couldn't talk to anyone. News was late, and the traveling was mind-boggling. especially in the case of Andre. Only the NWA world champion would travel as much as Andre. And he loved that, but it's a different world. And thank God, back then, not everyone had a phone in his hand that could take a picture with him, because he would have never been able to go anywhere if he was to go out today.
I can't
he
even
couldn't go
imagine
nowhere.
I can't even imagine what it would be like for him today. I wish we had that opportunity to know that, but he passed away when he was 46 years old. Obviously, there's a lot of contributing factors to his death. Did you find anything out as far as stuff that maybe he did that was destructive, or things that maybe he did to prolong his life? Is there anything about his health that you can tell us? Just, not to spoil anything in the book.
Anything that happened is in link to acromegaly. And obviously, if he would have ate healthy food and not drink and take real good care and exercise early on, maybe he could have extended a little bit his life beyond the 46. But acromegaly implies that your heart will grow, all your muscles, your hands, your tongue, your jaw. So that's why you can see as Andrew gets older, you can see in between his teeth on some pictures, because the jaw is getting bigger, but the teeth remain where they are. So the space in between teeth becomes more evident. And that's all things that happen with acromegaly. And, people often say, oh, he had gigantic, you see, there's some words in English that I can, gigantism.
Yes,
but gigantism is part of acromegaly. And there's so much more ailments than just getting bigger that comes with acromegaly. It's basically a tumor on your brain that creates that issue, and he chose never to get that removed, and ultimately that's what would bring his early death.
That's why, nowadays when folks are diagnosed with something like this, there's a couple surgeries they can do to prolong their life. That's why, someone like the Big Show, for example, is in great health in his 40s. And it's really sad because because Andre, and I could be wrong. I mean, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I would assume that because Andre grew up and was around in the time that he was, because kayfabe was real, and because he was probably pretty stubborn and not kind of the person that shared a lot, I would assume that he didn't like going to the doctor. Is that right?
I mean, that seems, from speaking with the family, it was never a big, the family stuck on going to the doctor for everything. And obviously he didn't want to go, and he didn't want to stop being on the road. And it was a big, scary proposition back then, even if the surgery was available to him. You're talking about brain surgery in the 1970s. So that's a little bit more intrusive than it is today. But the option was there. But Big Show spoke about his own operation, and there's always risk with that operation even today, because it is brain surgery. So obviously, did he have the right people to advise him and tell him what was best for him and not what was best for business? Maybe there was not enough of those people around him. And maybe because he had, very little education per se, as he, quit school as soon as he could, that there was not a lot of way for him to truly understand the benefit, and that he would not have stopped being the giant at that point in time. Look at the Big Show. I mean, he kept his size, and gain that were made while the tumor was there were not lost after the surgery, but it kept his body in check, though. So, I mean, it makes it a very tragic story, because, with a little bit more better guidance and better knowledge of the situation, I mean, it'd be surprising that he would have made it to his 80s, like he would be today in his early 80s. But he would have lived a lot longer than 46, which, Big Show just turned 47. I'm 49. So that's like, for me, I mean, as I was writing the book, it hit me, he was younger than me. So, but he looked so old at the end. He looked like he was 60 or 70.
Yeah. The prospect of making a choice like this, nowadays we wouldn't really think of this. This wouldn't be the kind of thing that we would have to make a choice about. But, back then, choosing between your livelihood and what makes you profitable as a personality, and dying early, you know what I mean? That's kind of a decision that he was having to make in his mind, and,
Yeah.
all the risks associated, right?
Exactly. And he made the choice that he made, and that's what he told Jackie, that lived with him and her husband Frenchie at the ranch, is that, God made me this way, and that's what makes me a giant, and that's how I'm gonna die, basically. And he was told about it in Japan, probably from a Japanese doctor to Japanese official who translated to English, and he was, someone who spoke English then translated to him in French. So, that's a lot to learn through so many different languages and interpret. So from there, we'll never know, because those people are all gone. But obviously, there's a lot of questions to be raised about it. And it's very sad that he never probably got all the information that he needed to have at the time to make a better decision for himself.
Now, in this book, is there discussion of people he liked working with versus people that he didn't like working with, and kind of how he treated them differently? And a follow up to that is, how did he feel about Bobby Heenan?
I mean, apparently there was a line in the sand, and you could either be on his good side or you could be on his bad side. And if you spoke French, then you were already, you were part of his group, and you were on the right side. If you speak any other language, then, some people like Bobby Heenan, he was very close to, and he loved, and he thought, brought a lot to his character when he turned heel. And he had good friend like Mean Gene that he was close to. But at the same time, in the ring, he had some problem with people like the Iron Sheik. He had problems with Kamala at some point. And, some of the most famous stories are his problem with Big John Studd, who, even though was idolizing the Giant, Andre did not appreciate some of the things Studd would do, and they never really got along. But that's the one thing also people need to understand. If you're a wrestler, or if you work at a grocery store, you're not going to love and go for a beer with everybody after work. How many people you actually hang out with from work? And we all imagine wrestler being that big happy family of group. Yes, they some of them, yes, depending, but not all of them obviously love each other. I mean, that's not what life is, and you have that in every walk of life and every work, and wrestling is no different. So, and back then, those guys would do anything to entertain themselves. So if you started to rib somebody a little bit, and he caught it, and he not played along, but, he let himself go and be reeled in, they would like push it and push it and push it until, they were on their back laughing on the floor. And that's what Andre would do with a guy like Studd. He would push it and make the other boys laugh. So more the boys were laughing, the more he would do. And, that was the dressing room mentality of the wrestling business back then. Because they were on the road so many days. Pat Patterson has we would do anything just to entertain ourselves, because they got so bored traveling and doing the same thing over and over again. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of that in the way you would react or play pranks with people.
Well, I guess, I could sit here and talk to you about Andre all night, but here's the thing. folks need to get out and buy this book. We're not going to give the book away to them on some podcast. So as far as, telling them everything that happened. But before we wrap this up, I'm assuming there's a couple rib stories in this book. And if you could, tell us one rib story that you like where Andre, you mentioned he was messing with Big John Studd. What are some of the things that he would do to people to mess with them?
The farting seems to be the one that people remember the most fondly. It was discussed in the HBO documentary. He would love to do that, and he would, we were even told by Rick Martel that he got some sort of machine made that made the noise. It was not like a fart cushion, but it was like a small machine with a spring that would make similar noise and that he would have in his pocket, especially when he would go into an elevator, because he was not always ready for that, and the doing that would make him laugh like crazy. So it is things like that. Rick, one I like is Rick. I don't know if it made the cut in the book, but there was those two French stewardess in Atlanta, I believe, and they were in front of them and behind them in the line at the hotel desk, and they started to talk in French and started to ask themselves, if Andre was big all over. And obviously he turned around and he told them in French that je pourrais vous le montrer. So, Rick to this day find it's very funny because the girls thought, they could speak French and that, the two guys in front would not know they were talking about them. But Andre knew and he reacted right away. So, he was, entertaining his buddies and entertaining himself all the time. And but at the same time, I love, things in the book like, being told that, he would be able to repair the car on the way to a show because the car was having issues. And he knew a little bit about cars because he had one of his best friends from childhood at a garage to this day, still owns a garage in France near where Andre was born. So, those little details would give you a glimpse in much more than just Andre the Giant, the eighth wonder of the world, the man who turned against Hulk Hogan and fought him at WrestleMania 3 and got body slam and all that. So it's such a beautiful story, tragic, yes, but beautiful, friendship and of a man who put himself on the back burner for his art.
Well, that is awesome, man. These are some great stories. I think that reading this book is going to be the closest someone who's, around nowadays can get to knowing Andre. And that's a pretty cool thing that every wrestling fan would love to do. So,
for
folks,
sure.
Folks can, again, get this book. It's The Eighth Wonder of the World, The True Story of Andre the Giant. And they can get on ecwpress.com. That should be easy to remember. I'll have the Amazon link and the Audible link down in the notes for this episode. If you guys want to click right there, you can take it right to it and get your book here in a couple days. It's tremendous. And, thanks for doing this, man. Not the interview. Reading the book. Thanks for the interview, too. But writing this book is an important part of wrestling history. And if it weren't for folks like you doing these kinds of things, all this information would be lost when people pass away. So thank you.
Yeah, and it is important because from Andre, when he was born, the wrong name was written on his birth certificate, and everybody had him died a day earlier than he actually did, because his actual death certificate is January 28th, and it's been reported for years as his date of death as being January 27th. But, he played card with his buddies the night before, and he went back to his hotel in Paris, way after midnight. So it was January 28th, and he was discovered and declared dead only in the afternoon of the 28th. So, that's his life. So many misconceptions and lies becoming stories and tales and, half-truth becoming, truth and, So it was important that such a book exists that went beyond just the matches and the character. And I think we did an important job for wrestling history.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about it a little bit. Do you have any social media or anything that you'd like to plug
people
yourself?
can find me on Twitter and Instagram, Bertrand Hebert, and they can find Pat Laprade also on Instagram and Twitter. So we're always there. We try to answer if they want to tell us about how they feel about our books. Well, we're more than happy to talk about it or answer questions. So check us out.
Outstanding. Well, thanks again, man, for coming on, and au revoir. Is that right?
Yes, au revoir, mon ami.